talking about water birth. So I'd love to talk about, maybe some pros and cons of water birth. First, let's start with what water birth means and then talk about the pros and cons. So water birth means giving birth in the water. So meaning the baby is born, their entire body comes out in the water, and then they're lifted out of the water and put on mom's chest. So water birth is exactly what it means. Now, it's different from laboring in the water or using the tub or the shower. Those are great and make a lot of sense and great for labor, but this is the birthing in the water. So there are, first of all, let me just, before I hit pros and cons, I'd love to say that water birth is not available everywhere. So it's more common to find the option for water birth in a birth center or definitely a home birth. But there are some hospitals around the US, Canada, the UK that allow for birth in the water. But that would be more rare. But it can happen. So if you are interested in water birth, then definitely your first priority is to find a place to give birth that offers that. So it's not, I cannot believe I've had people in a class and I've talked about, okay, water birth might be an option where you're giving birth, and people say, that's what I really want. And I ask them where they're giving birth and I say, they don't offer it there. So you need to find out beforehand because only certain places will allow for water birth. Now, a water birth can happen either in an inflatable tub or in a bathtub or a rigid tub, depending upon what is available at the place where you're giving birth or if you're giving birth at home. It is important to have the water at a certain temperature so that baby is born into basically doesn't have much of a temperature difference between inside where they were in a fluid-filled environment to the outside. And your care provider is someone who will take care of that and make sure that's maintained. Now, pros and cons of a water birth. First, let's start with the pros. So, water birth is something that, first of all, laboring in water is something that can take away the pain, really be a great strategy for pain reduction. And water birth, one of the pros is that you get that pain reduction all the way through the birth of the baby. So it's not something you have like through transition and then when it's time to push that you have to get out and birth the baby. With water birth, you can continue that pain management all the way through the birth of the baby. Now, another pro of water birth is that it reduces tearing of the perineum. So because of the pressure and the water and, just the maybe increased ability for tissues to stretch, the water birth, women who give birth in the water have less tearing of the perineum, either experience no tearing or a smaller amount of tearing compared to people giving birth on the land. So that is a nice pro to water birth. One thing that I feel like isn't talked about a lot with water birth, but personally I had 2 of my 4 children in the water, that I found was a big pro was the privacy of water birth. So instead of a typical birth on a bed, a land birth on the bed, where everyone is pretty much, right there looking at your crotch as the baby comes out, a water birth has sort of that filtered view of what's going on, which can really lead to a feeling of privacy to the person giving birth and a feeling of a little bit more autonomy of birthing, I think, in the water than giving birth on the land is I believe. And finally, one of the pros of water birth is a decreased incidence of postpartum hemorrhage. So, an interesting benefit of a water birth. Now, cons of a water birth, I guess the first con is just to point out that it's not very available. So it's not an option that a lot of people have. So it is rare, but the umbilical cord snapping in the process of pulling baby out of the water if there was a short cord. That is rare, but can be a complication, though usually has no impact on the baby, but can be a complication that happens with water birth. And then there is a slight increase in infection risk that a couple of studies have seen, that might show an increase of infection. And then the last con is just maybe the unknown, because there haven't been a ton of research studies done on water birth and comparing water birth and land birth. So the unknown is possibly a con when you're trying to make a decision. Also, as they're studying the bacteria, the gut microbiome, and the exposure, the positive exposure of baby to the microbiome that they are exposed to on their way out, on their exit through the mom's vagina. The babies born in the water might not have the same exposure, and so that is still being studied. So we still don't know everything about that as well. So there are significant pros and just a few cons that we know of right now, though research is catching up to water birth, and it's not that available different places. But if it's something that is of interest to you, make sure that you look around to see what options you have in your area for water birth. I would love to hear your stories or your questions about water birth. Go ahead and put them below, and I will get to those in the comments. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button, and I hope to see you next time on The Big Wheel of Birth. Thanks for joining me, guys. See you next time. Bye.